Hello, can you hear me? Excellent, very cool. So anyways, thank you guys for having me here. I've never been to Miami before, so this is really cool for me. So anyways, as you can see from my big ugly face up there, my name is Ian Lendler, and the reason you guys are here today is because of the book fair, and the reason I'm here today is because I write books, so it's lucky that we came together. So I go and talk to schools a lot, and when I'm done talking, I take questions, and the first question I always used to get was, what kind of stuff did you like to read? And the fact was, I love to read anything. So my parents, when they used to ground me, they would ground me into my bedroom if I did something wrong. And then they realized, hey guys, come on in. I'm just talking about when I used to get in trouble. Hang on, we'll let them come in actually. Oh, so anyways, so when I used to get in trouble, my parents would ground me in my room, and then they realized that I was totally fine with that because I would just sit in my room and read. And so then they started to ground me into the bathroom because there were no books in there. And then I started hiding books under the sink. And then they realized I was doing that, and they took the books out from under the sink, and I just started reading the backs of shampoo bottles, which it turns out are really interesting to read because there's about 1 million ingredients. So anyways, but my favorite thing to read when I was your guys' age was comic books. A lot of people think comic books will make you dumb. My dad did not like me reading them when I was little, but comic books are awesome. X-Men and Avengers, those were kind of the two big ones when I was your age. Hawkeye was my favorite Avenger, in case anyone's interested. And the fact is, comic books for a long time were just this, superheroes, right? And I read superhero comic books all the way through elementary school and all the way through middle school. And around high school, I kind of started to get bored because this is all that there ever were. And then someone came up with a term called a graphic novel. Do any of you guys read graphic novels, or do any of you know what it means? Yeah. How would you describe a graphic novel? It's all right. Have you read any? No? Has anybody read a graphic novel? Yes. How would you describe it? Mm-hmm. And it uses pictures, right? It's just a graphic novel is just a fancy word for a comic book. But they invented it because a graphic novel is a comic book that doesn't need to have a superhero in it, basically. And when they realized that it's just a story with pictures, they realized you can tell a story in a lot of different ways. You can tell stories about zombie apocalypses. There are graphic novels about Greek gods. The author of this is here today. He's talking later. It's a very cool series. My favorite graphic novel of all time is called Persepolis. It's about a little girl growing up in Iran, which turns out it's not a very nice place to grow up. And this thing, Adventure Time. I'm very proud to say, so my next book that's coming out, it's with the artists for Adventure Time, so I get to talk to them a lot, and I still have no idea what this show is about. This is the craziest show on the planet. So anyways, I was writing for a long time. I was writing children's picture books, and then I decided I wanted to write a book that I would have liked to read, and so I wanted to write my own graphic novel. So here was my idea. I said, okay, how about if there's a zoo, and the zookeeper is locking up for the night, and the anteater steals her keys, right? And then when she walks away, the anteater lets all the animals out of the cage, right? Now, did anybody read Goodnight Gorilla when they were little? Like your parents? It's a pretty popular book. So what happens in Goodnight Gorilla when they let all the animals out of the cage? No? Does anybody remember what happens when they let the animals out of the cage? All the animals follow the zookeeper home and get in bed, right? Because that's what little kids like to do. They like to cuddle in bed with their parents. But this is for older kids. So I thought, what are the animals going to do? Well, they'll probably have some sort of a party. So I decided they should put on a play. So my first book was The Stratford Zoo Presents Macbeth, which is a pretty famous play. And I cheated because I had help writing it. My co-writer for it was this guy. Anybody know who he is? Anybody recognize him? All right. His name was William Shakespeare, born 1564, died 1616. He is one of the greatest writers of all time, and he's definitely the greatest playwright of all time. And he had a problem, the same one as me, which is when my first book came out, my publisher said, hey, that was pretty good. Why don't you do another one? And so my problem was, I said, what am I going to do next? Uh-oh, I need another idea. And the problem was solved when I realized Shakespeare had the same problem because he had a day job. He wasn't sitting around thinking he was an awesome genius because he was in charge of this thing. This is called the Globe Theater. And if you go to London right now, if you fly over there, you can buy a ticket and you can go see a show there. It's not the original Globe Theater, because Shakespeare had this really cool idea for one of his battle scenes that he would fire off live cannons in the middle of the audience, right? And unfortunately, one of those cannons burned the entire theater to the ground. But they rebuilt it brick by brick, and this is what it looks like today. It's called Theater in the Round, because the theater's a big circle. And there's a couple things to notice about this. So, see these people right here? They're all standing, no seats. Because if you were poor back in Shakespeare's day, and you could only afford 1 penny to go see a show, you had the privilege of standing. You got close to the stage, but Shakespeare's plays were like 4 or 5 hours long, so you could be there for a while. Now, if you were really wealthy and you could afford 2 pennies, you got to sit up here in the seats. The other thing to kind of notice about this is it's not even full, but that's a lot of people in there, right? So that theater could hold a little over 2,000 people. So Shakespeare had to keep writing new plays, right? Because if he didn't have new plays, he wouldn't get an audience in. If he didn't get an audience, he wouldn't make money. And if he didn't make money, he and his actors, they wouldn't eat that day, right? This was serious business for him. So he had to come up with a new play. It's kind of hard. So he decided he would steal an idea, kind of like I did. Now, how many people have heard of Romeo and Juliet? Okay. Some of you and definitely almost all of you, right? So the fact is, Shakespeare had heard of Romeo and Juliet too, because 50 years before he was born, this book came out. It was called Romeo and Juliet, and it was really popular. But the fact is, he didn't even come up with the idea. This guy did. His name was Ovid. He's a Greek guy who was writing over 2,000 years ago. And he wrote a story called Pyramus and Thisbe. So I'll tell you the story. I'll do the 30-second version. Ready? Okay. Pyramus and Thisbe is about 2 families that hate each other, but they live right next to each other. And the bedroom of the young man and the young woman in the family is right next to each other, and there's a crack in the wall. And they start to whisper to each other through the crack. And their families find out about it and stab them all to death. And that's the Romeo and Juliet story. There you go. Now then, I had a problem with this. My problem was I had to come up with this story. I had to write this, and I realized that Romeo and Juliet is a really popular play, right? It's been around for a long time. 2,000 years means Romeo and Juliet has been around since before Jesus was born, all right? It's one of the oldest stories in human history. It's also the most performed play nowadays. Theaters around the world do Romeo and Juliet. And if you keep doing the same Romeo and Juliet all the time, it's going to get really boring. So the challenge for me, for Shakespeare, for anybody doing Romeo and Juliet, is how do you do your own version, right? So there's lots of versions of Romeo and Juliet now. There's kind of old-time ones like this. There's modern ones like this. This one's actually set in Miami between rival street gangs, right? There's ballet versions of Romeo and Juliet. There's musical versions of Romeo and Juliet. There's ninja versions of Romeo and Juliet. You can really do the story with anything. There's kung fu versions of Romeo and Juliet. And Romeo flies over flames and fights his kung fu, which is really the best way to fight your kung fu. There's Indian Bollywood versions of Romeo and Juliet. There's Lego versions, of course, of Romeo and Juliet. Anybody seen Lion King 2? Anyone? Then you have seen Romeo and Juliet, because they just stole the story straight and did it with Simba. And, of course, there's Garden Gnome versions of Romeo and Juliet. Right? All right, so it's fair to say Romeo and Juliet is a really, really popular story. So I was going to make that my next book. So do any of you guys... I had a son. I had 2 sons, one in 3rd grade and one in pre-K when I was writing this. And my problem was Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. Do any of you know what tragedy is? Yeah? Yeah, it's a sad play. Usually the definition of a tragedy is it's sad, and also at the end, all the main characters die, right? And I wanted my son to read this, but he wasn't even in kindergarten yet, and I thought it might kind of bum him out a little bit if everybody in the book dies. So I had to decide what main characters I was going to use. And I figured since the play is taking place in a zoo, I might as well have the main characters hibernate instead of being killed. So my job as a writer is, what kind of animals hibernate? I have to cast my play now. Who are my main actors going to be? Well, there's a bear. Everyone knows that one, right? Does anybody know anyone besides this? Because I'll be honest, the only one that I knew was bear and squirrel, right? Yeah? Bat? Yeah, definitely. Yeah? Skunks? Mm-hmm. The problem with skunks is, if I made that the main character in my play, everyone would just run away, so he wouldn't fall in love too easily, right? Yeah? A bee? Yes, bees hibernate during the winter. See, I didn't even know that. This is the fun thing about being a writer. You get to learn new stuff. All right, so I had to pick my main character. Skunks, no. Snakes kind of freak me out. Not going to do that. Bats are nocturnal. The whole play would take place at night. Not going to do that. So I'll go with a bear. Now, Romeo and Juliet is about two families that hate each other because they're exact opposites of each other, right? So what would the opposite be of a big furry bear? Yeah. What? A human would be good. Yeah. No fur, a lot smaller, probably going to get eaten. That'd be a good one. Yeah. What? A wolf is pretty good. They're definitely different sizes. A cat? That'd be really small. Yeah. A dog? Excellent. All right, last one. Yeah. A bee? Actually, that would be a really good one because bears eat honey, and bees probably don't like that too much, right? Actually, I had one kid who once said a salmon because bears eat salmon, and I was kind of mad when he told me that because that's a lot better idea than I had. So I kind of wish I'd been able to write that. So I chose a chicken. Small, got feathers, you know, kind of different from a bear. All right, so I've got my main characters down. So, time to write the thing. Any of you guys write your own comic books, by the way? Do your own drawings, anything like that? Okay, cool. So, when you write a comic book, it looks like this. So the stuff in black, that's the actual words that you'll see on the page. Welcome to the Verona Petting Zoo. And the stuff that I put in blue, that's the actual art that we're going to see once I get the art done. A human child is now petting a rooster. Look, Mommy, a pretty birdie. But this wasn't just any ordinary pretty birdie. This was Romeo, the rooster prince. We focus in closely on a handsome rooster who's standing very proudly. Right? So, all right. So that's the first page of my book. So I've got to draw a really handsome rooster, a prince, right? So he's going to be amazing, right? He's going to be the greatest rooster you've ever seen. So you want to see it? Bam. Right? No? Okay, so I can tell you, when I take questions at the end, the next question I always get is, did you do the art on your book? And this is my answer. I spent a lot of time on this, by the way. I thought the belly button was a nice touch. But this is what it looks like when I spend a lot of time working on drawing a rooster. But if you give my writing to someone who spent his whole life practicing being an artist, then it takes them about 5 or 10 minutes to do this. A little bit better, right? This is called a sketch thumbnail because if you're doing a comic book, before you do a big battle scene, before you draw a great big castle, you just got to know what your main character looks like, right? All right, so once he's got Romeo down, he starts to work on Juliet, right? Now, my job as a writer is, see, I know this is the writer's fair and author's fair, but the fact is I think illustrators are awesome. My job as a writer is I got two things. I got to come up with the idea, and I got to put the words in the right place. I don't even have to spell it right anymore. Computers do that for me, right? But the illustrator has about 20 jobs. So he's, first of all, he's an actor, right? This is a prince rooster, so he's going to stand with his chest all puffed out like that. Maybe you know some people who do that. And Juliet in the beginning is pretty shy, so she kind of stands like this. He's the prop designer. What kind of a sword is Romeo going to hold? There's a million different swords in the world, right? And what kind of a dress is Juliet going to wear? What kind of a crown is she going to wear? And he has to make all those decisions. And then he does my favorite thing, which is called inking and coloring. So you see all the kind of scribbly stuff? He's making mistakes. He's trying to figure out what he's doing. So he takes an ink pen, draws a nice solid line through it, erases all the scribble, adds some color, and we get this. Right? Romeo and Juliet. And once he's done that, he works on his secondary characters. So we have Mercutio, that's Romeo's best friend, and this guy, Tibbs, that's Juliet's crazy cousin. And once he's done that, he hasn't even started on the comic book yet. This is literally just a reference thing. He'll put this next to his drawing board, so while he's working, he can just look up and see if he's getting them right the whole time, right? So, When you guys read picture books, you open up the page and what do you see? You see one big picture on one side and one big picture on the other. But when you read comic books, it looks like this, right? It's broken down into lots of little squares and rectangles and triangles and circles and whatever the shape you want. Those are called panels, right? And the thing is, the book is about 90 pages long. The artist has to do 90 pages like this of just kind of a quick sketch trying to figure out how many panels on a page, when do you turn the page, what are they going to be doing, right? So for the stuff I wrote, he's figuring, okay, well, maybe when we meet Romeo, he's kind of dusting himself off. He's trying to look good for the audience, you know, get himself correct. So we're finally ready to meet Romeo the Rooster Prince. After all this stuff, we can actually tell you the story, right? All right, so I'm going to tell you the story of Romeo and Juliet right now. And I'm going to start it the way that Shakespeare started his story. I always get a little lightheaded when I do that. Now, you may be wondering why I blew a horn that sounds a little bit like a fart. And the fact is, think about this, okay? Shakespeare was alive 450 years ago, okay? So that means no computers, no TVs, no movies, no radios, no internet, no smartphones, no dumb phones, no payphones, right? None of that. No posters, no newspapers. So how is he even going to tell people that he wrote this awesome new play called Romeo and Juliet and he wants to perform it in his theater? You guys, what grade are you guys in? Fourth grade? So you're all like 10, 11? Perfect. Okay. If you were 10, 11, if you did not come from a wealthy family in Shakespeare's day, you had to go to work. If you had money, you had the privilege of going to school. But if you didn't have money, you had to go to work. And Shakespeare had a lot of kids working in his theater. And what he'd do is he would send them out into London with these trumpets, and they would blow their horn. And all the tradesmen knew that was the sign that the show was about to begin. So they would follow behind these kids, kind of like the Pied Piper. And these kids would lead them from all over London into the Globe Theatre, where they would sit down, and the show would start. And we would meet Romeo, the Rooster Prince, right? Looking a bit better now. Now, Romeo was a rooster of great passion. He loved to sing. He loved to dance. He was a party rooster, right? He just wanted to have fun, have some adventure. Unfortunately, Romeo lives in a petting zoo. And a petting zoo is a lot like school, right? Because your friends are there, and that's cool, but you kind of do the same thing day after day after day after day. And that can get kind of boring. And so Romeo, every day, stands by the fence, and he looks and he wonders what his life would be like if he could just go beyond that fence out into the forest where the wild animals live, right? Now, I could keep going on about how bored Romeo was, but you'd probably get a little bit bored too. And so the same thing happened in Shakespeare's time. If he was an actor in his own plays, and if the audience got bored, they would start to throw fruit at the actors on the stage, right? So he had to keep people interested. So he knew that the best way to keep people interested was a good fight scene, right? So Romeo, we meet him, he's bored, and then, boom, a fight breaks out. Right there, he gets caught up in it without even really wanting to. And we see the fights between Mercutio, his best friend, and Tibbs, one of the forest animals who we've met before. And the zookeeper, he's kind of like the principal, right? He breaks it up. And he says, hey, what's all the fighting about? And we find out that Mercutio and Romeo, they live in the petting zoo. So they're called the Petters. And that guy, the fox, lives out in the wild forest. So they're called the Wilders. And the Wilders and the Petters hate each other. Why? No particular reason. They're just different, right? Because the Petters think the Wilders are just crazed, bloodthirsty animals. And the Wilders think the Petters are spoiled, pampered babies who get everything fed to them by hand, which they do. But the zookeeper breaks it up, and he says, I'm sick of this fighting. The next one of you that starts a fight, I'm going to banish you forever. Does anybody know what banish means? Yeah? Yeah, they have to go somewhere else. They can't go back home, right? So, now that we've met people in the petting zoo, let's go out into the forest. And we can meet Juliet. See? Hello, pleased to meet you. As you can see, she's a very polite young lady. because Juliet was raised to be a lady, right? Which means always say the right thing and always do the right thing and always, 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 always obey your parents. And the thing about that is when that's your life, your parents are always in your face. In fact, when the play starts, her parents have a new order for her. They want her to be best friends with that guy, Perry the Lion. Why? Because he's rich. That'll help their family out. Unfortunately, he's also a total jerk. And so how does Juliet feel about that? Well, I mean, how does anybody feel when their parents tell them to do something they don't want to do, right? Kind of like this. Nyeh. Remember what I said? I love, like, illustrators are just great actors. I didn't write anything for this, but he just put this in. Nyeh. Right? I love that. But her dad wouldn't give up. He decided, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw a party. Everybody likes a good party. It'll be a costume party, too. And I'll invite Juliet, and I'll invite Perry the Lion, and everyone will have a good time. Boom, they'll become best friends. So he sends out an invitation to all the animals in the forest with the fastest messenger in the forest, that squirrel. And of course, as we all know, squirrels have one major weakness, which is nuts. And one throw of a nut from Mercutio, the squirrel drops what he's doing, and suddenly Romeo and Mercutio have their hands on an invitation to the wildest party of the year. Now, Mercutio, he's the smart one in the group. Romeo's not so smart sometimes. And he says, hey, you know what's going to happen if we go out into the middle of a forest and we're zoo animals? They're going to kill us. And Romeo says, I don't care. I've been waiting my whole life for this. Finally, we can go out and do something fun. We can do something wild, right? So that night, in the middle of the night, they put on masks and they sneak out through a hole in the fence. And they go out into the middle of the forest and they hit the Wilder party. And as we all know from Romeo and Juliet, at the party, they see each other from across the room. And from the very first moment that Romeo and Juliet see each other, they like each other right away, right? But as I said, what's the problem with Juliet's life? She never gets a minute to herself. And right away, Perry the Lion is interrupting. In fact, he busts Romeo. He finds out that Romeo is a petter, right? And Juliet discovers that the guy that she's starting to like a little bit, well, he's from a family that she's supposed to hate, right? And before he can explain anything, Mercutio grabs him and drags him away before they get killed. Now, Juliet's parents, they warn her about Romeo, right? He's a petter. Don't trust him. Don't listen to him. Don't think about him. In fact, you need to go home right now and go to your room for even talking to him. So that's what she does. She goes home to her room. She closes her door. But she goes out onto her balcony, and she just can't stop thinking about how awesome that Romeo guy was, right? And Romeo, he was going back to the zoo, but he couldn't stop thinking about Juliet. So he told his friend Mercutio, go on home. I'm going to go back into the forest, even though it's dangerous. And he goes and stands right underneath her balcony there. And he hears everything that Juliet says about him. And so he decides to solve that situation by going up to meet her again, right? Now remember, Juliet is in a room, and the door is closed. So her parents have no idea that he's there. So they actually spend the night together. Juliet teaches him how to play like the wild animals do. And Romeo teaches her how to sing and dance like the civilized animals do. And in the morning, the sun rises. And Romeo asks Juliet the most important question in life. He says, Juliet, do you want to be my best friend? And she says, I do. Right? And they lived happily ever after. But they didn't, because this is a tragedy. And in a tragedy, you're not allowed to be happy for very long. Right? So, Romeo's psyched. He's got a new best friend. He just went into the forest. He went to the best party of his life. He's having a good old time. And he goes on home to the zoo, and this guy again. He's still mad about them crashing that party. In fact, he sticks a sword in Romeo's face and challenges him to a duel. But Romeo says no. Now, he was raised to always fight with wilders, right? But he just spent the night with a wilder. In fact, he became best friends with one, and he's certainly not going to fight the cousin of his new best friend, right? That would just be bad manners. Unfortunately, Tibbs doesn't take no for an answer, and he attacks Romeo. Fortunately for Romeo, he's still got friends, right? Mercutio steps in to protect him. I love illustrators. They always provide nice sound effects during fights, right? Boom, shakalaka. I love that. And the problem is when you fight, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And Mercutio is plucked to death. And that is the point, which is my favorite scene in any tragedy, where the main actor gets to go, no! Because Romeo kind of loses his mind at that point. And he flies into battle, and he kills Juliet's cousin. Oops. Right? Now he realizes he's in deep trouble at this point. Right? And he's even worse trouble because the zookeeper shows up. And the zookeeper looks at what he's done, and he banishes Romeo from the zoo forever. Now, as we know, that means Romeo can never go home again, right? So do you want to find out what he does next? So, Shakespeare knew you'd want to know what he does next. So, he leaves you in suspense. He takes an intermission. Does anybody know what intermission means? Yeah? Yeah, he's going to go back. But before that, we have this. What? Well, sometimes you have to pay. But you're all right. There's a little break where the audience takes a little break from the play because intermission was actually invented in Shakespeare's time, right? Now, they didn't have these back then, electric lights. So the play would be lit by torches and candles. And after a couple hours, those would burn down. So they just had to be changed, right? Now, while they were doing that, the actors realized that was a really good time to take a break. Have a little drink of water, stretch your legs. And the audience realized that, well, I mean, what happened before you guys came into this theater, right? I'm guessing your teachers told you, don't embarrass our school, be polite, don't say anything, don't do anything, don't talk to your neighbor, don't talk to your friends, right? Listen to what I'm saying, right? And that can get kind of frustrating after a while. So the intermission is when the audience gets to make some noise and stretch their legs, right? So we're going to try it right now. I'm going to take a 30-second water break. And in that time, you can make as much noise as you want, right? But there's a trick. The theater will always give some kind of a signal to let you know that the intermission is over, right? So for the next 30 seconds or go wild. So when the intermission is over and the audience comes back in and they unwrap all their candy so they don't make any crinkly noises and everybody gets back in their seat and it gets so quiet that we can hear the curtain open, we get to see what Romeo did next. Because he had to leave the zoo, but the only place next to the zoo is the forest. And he's in danger. Because the Wilders, they want revenge for him killing Tibbs, right? And he knows if they catch him, they're going to turn him into a big old pile of chicken nuggets, right? But despite the fear of being chicken nuggeted, Romeo has only one thing on his mind: Juliet. So he goes back through the forest, and he goes back to her balcony, and he begs her for forgiveness, right? Now, Juliet, at this point, she's got a choice to make, and it's a pretty important choice. She can do what she's done her whole life: obey her parents. What would her parents want? They would want her to kill Romeo. At the very least, they would want her to tell them that Romeo's there so they could kill him, right? Or she can listen to her own heart, right? Romeo is her new best friend, right? She knows that he's a good person. And this is the point where Juliet decides, I'm not going to be a little girl anymore, right? It's time to grow up and make my own decisions. So she forgives Romeo. She invites him up into her room, and they spend the night together again. And again the next morning, They watch the sunrise. And Romeo leaves. He can't go to the zoo. He can't stay in the forest. He has to go to the next town over for safety. And Juliet doesn't know if she'll ever see Romeo again, right? So she's kind of having a bad day. Not only that, but her dad finds out. And he finally puts his foot down. Looks like this. Right? And he tells her, and actually he orders her, right? No more petters. No more disobeying orders. You will be best friends with Perry the lion. And so Juliet reacts, I mean, kind of the way you would expect her to. Flop. But she gets up from her bed then, and she decides she's going to be the grown-up Juliet. She's going to figure out how to solve her problems. So she goes and meets the wisest creature in the forest, the great owl. Right? And the great owl comes up with a plan. And it goes like this. A sleeping potion. And when Juliet drinks the sleeping potion down, she will fall asleep, right? And since she's a bear, when bears sleep, you're going to think they're hibernating. And when they're hibernating, they're gone for the rest of the year, right? So the only thing you can do with a hibernating bear, cancel all their play dates, stick them on a nice comfy mattress, and put them in a cave, right? And then you just walk away. They're going to be sleeping for a long time. Now, the owl is going to send a message to Romeo, and that message is going to say, it's a fake. That sleeping potion is going to wear off in 2 days, right? Now, everyone else is going to think she's gone for the year. So, Romeo, if you come back to that cave, Juliet's going to wake up, and you guys can play together for a long time without anybody interfering. So that's a pretty important message, right? So he sends it with the fastest messenger in the forest. But we've seen that guy before, right? And he messes up again. And Romeo does find out about Juliet. Only he doesn't find out from the great owl. He just hears that that Juliet girl, she started to hibernate. And what that means to Romeo is, considering how long roosters live, she's gone for the rest of his life, right? Now, if you think back to the very beginning, what was Romeo? He was a party rooster, right? He just wanted to go to a party. He wanted to have fun. He wanted to have an adventure. But he's done with that now. He only wants one thing. He wants to be back with Juliet. So he starts walking back. He goes back through the forest because he doesn't care if the wilders kill him. And he goes back through the zoo because he doesn't care if the zookeeper catches him and puts him in jail. And he goes to the one place that no animal ever wants to go. And if any of you have pets, you'll know what I mean. He goes to the vets. And from the vet, he gets a sleeping potion too, but a real one this time. And he takes that sleeping potion and he goes and brings it into Juliet's cave. But what he doesn't know is before he gets there, someone is waiting for him in the shadows. It's Perry the lion, right? And Perry confronts him. He says, you're the one causing all of my problems, right? You're a petter. I'm a wilder. I'm supposed to be your friend. Her dad says so, right? But Romeo, he's just had enough, right? He's having a bad day, and so he agrees to fight. Anybody want to see a lion fight a rooster? See, Shakespeare is right. Everybody likes a good fight scene. All right, so Romeo prepares for his fight by giving a mighty baka! Right? Now, if you want to see his fight, I got to hear a baka from you. Oh, you can do better than that. Come on. There we go. That's a little better. Wait, I didn't hear a baka over here. All right. Lion versus rooster, round one. Ding, ding, ding. And Romeo grabs Perry, and ding, 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 the fight's over. He kicks that lion's butt. Because he was raised to be a prince. They're taught how to fight, right? So Romeo can fight pretty well when he wants to. But with Perry out of the way, he goes to see Juliet, right? And for the very first time in their lives, there's no one interfering with them. There's no family. There's no friends. There's no one interrupting them. And so he does what he came there to do. He lies next to Juliet, and he drinks the sleeping potion. And when he does that, Juliet wakes up. And she looks at the sleeping potion that's empty, and she looks at Romeo, and she says, I'm going to kill that stupid owl. Right? Because She's alive. She's awake. She's fine. She's ready to hang out. And Romeo, well, he's gone, right? So Juliet decides she's going to do what Romeo came there to do. She's going to be with her best friend. So she's going to hibernate too, but for real this time. Now, does anybody know what bears do before they hibernate? Eat. Good. They eat a lot. So that's what Juliet does, right? Nom, 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 nom. And when you eat that much, you get kind of sleepy. And so Juliet lays down next to her best friend in the whole world. And together, they sleep forever. And that's the end. That's how Shakespeare ends it. This is a tragedy. I warned you before. Everybody dies at the end, right? Now, the thing is, I'm here to tell you that's not actually the end, okay? Because there's one more thing that happens in any tragedy that you'll ever see. Because the actors die, and then the actors stand up, and they take a bow, and the whole audience says, yay! And everybody leaves the theater, and they walk home and talk about how awesome the play was, and then they all go eat ice cream and make themselves feel better, right? So I had a problem when I was working on this, right? So when I asked in the beginning how many of you have heard of Romeo and Juliet, like all you guys raised your hand. Some of you guys raised your hand. A lot of you seen Lion King. Like everybody knows the Romeo and Juliet story, right? But as you've now seen, Romeo and Juliet is seriously depressing, right? So my question is, why do people like this thing so much, right? I mean, why do we even invent tragedies? Because never once on a Saturday night have I said to my friends, you know what we should do? Let's get together and really have a good old cry, right? I mean, like, why would we want to do this? So I was thinking about it, and I came up with my own answer. Here's my answer. This kid. Now then, he liked basketball, so he practiced every single day of his life. And he got so good that he became best player in the world, right? And also, this kid, he liked soccer, so he practiced every single day of his life, and he became the best player in the world, right? Now then, the fact is, anything that you practice, doesn't matter what, you're going to get good at. It's just the way it works, right? I loved writing when I was your guys' age, and so I wrote every single day of my life in journals and diaries, things like that. And I've published a few books. That's pretty cool. Now, I think tragedies are kind of like a type of practice, right? They help you get better at life. Now, you don't get a World Cup for being sad or a ring, right? But tragedies let you experience all the ups and downs that life has, right? So a tragedy will let you experience what it feels like to lose someone that you love. If you're little, maybe it's your favorite toy, or your best friend moves away, or maybe a family member has died, right? Tragedies let you experience what it feels like to be Juliet and have your parents always, always, always telling you what to do and showing you that sometimes you have to grow up. And tragedies let you experience, and this is what Romeo and Juliet's really about. You know, Shakespeare wrote a lot of plays, but this is his simplest because he has a real easy message. It's just when you meet someone new, doesn't matter how different they are, black, white, brown, rich, poor, different country, different accent, right? When you meet someone new, it's a chance to make a new friend, right? And despite all that, all those ups and downs and sad and happy and tragedy in the end, life is still pretty good because you get to walk away and eat ice cream to make yourself feel better, right? And that is the end of me talking. Now then, we have, how much time do we have? Okay, so we got some minutes. So I can now take any questions you have about chicken nuggets or bears or Shakespeare or writing or comic books too. Yes? Oh, he asked, how do I come up with my ideas? Well, that's the hardest question to answer because it just kind of pops in your head, you know? But the way I like to explain it is usually you take two different ideas that someone's thought of before. So Shakespeare, everybody knows him. And anybody seen Night at the Museum or The Zookeeper? Or, yeah, there's a whole lot of movies and stuff about things that happen at night in museums and zoos and stuff when everybody's gone to sleep, right? And you take those two ideas together and boop, you got a new idea. It's kind of simple. Yeah? Do I have a favorite hobby besides writing? Let's see. Well, I play soccer a lot, and I play the ukulele a lot, and I have 2 kids, and that's kind of like a hobby. So it certainly fills up a whole lot of my time. And all the adults just laughed at that one. You'll learn someday. Yes, do you have a question? If they took a sleeping potion, how do they die? Well, that's me mixing the two. So in the real Romeo and Juliet, what actually happens is Romeo drinks a potion and dies. And Juliet is so sad about that, she actually stabs herself to death. Right? But like I said, I had a son who was 4 years old when I was writing this, and I like my kids to read what I write. So I didn't really want him to see that part, right? So I just turned it into sleeping potion, right? Yes? Do I get inspiration from something? Well, I mean, I read a lot. Anybody, if you want to be a writer, that usually means you like reading, right? I mean, I read a lot when I was a kid. And so usually when you read, you kind of get ideas from other authors and stuff, right? So, which is why I'm kind of excited to walk around and see some of this stuff. Yeah. Oh, he asked, when did I start writing books? Well, that's like 2 questions. So I first sold a book like for money, which makes me a writer, when I was 21, right after I left college. But when I start writing books was like your guys' age, you know, like 3rd, 4th grade, because I came from a real small town, and it had a real small library and nothing else to do. There's no movie theater, nothing like that. So there was this one book series I really liked called Encyclopedia Brown. It's not real popular anymore. But it was about a boy genius who's a detective, and it was awesome. And I read all of them, and then my library didn't have any left, so I actually started to write my own, just because I wanted to keep the series going, you know, and that's kind of how I started writing, I think, you know. Yeah. 2 questions. All right, fair enough. Which one? That? Huh? 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 That's Mercutio. That's his best friend. I'm sorry, what? Maybe. That's up to you. If you want to write a sequel, you're welcome to. Right? But so he's asking about this. So the reason this is the cover is because you got Romeo and Juliet, because Romeo and Juliet is about love. But you got these behind because Romeo and Juliet is also about hate. Right? Because if Romeo and Juliet met and they fell in love and they got married and had some kids, that'd probably be pretty boring. So Romeo and Juliet is actually about 2 families that hate each other and what happens when you hate each other, right? Yeah. Do I have any siblings that arise? I have an older sister who's 4 years older than me. And when she stopped beating me up, when I was about 30, she decided she wanted to be a teacher. So she's an art teacher, actually. So I'm very proud of her. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry? Do I still want to start making more books? Oh, that's what I do, man. I sit down every day, every night, and because it's fun. You know, I mean, like, here's the thing about being a writer. You know how you go outside at recess time and you play, right? Yay, you just have fun. When you're a writer, all I'm doing is I'm having recess, but with words, right? I'm just playing around with words and messing around, and sometimes something funny happens. And then I keep following that down the line, right? And that's how it works. I just sit down and start to have a good time just with writing, right? Yes. You. Yeah, with the fade, yeah. Who inspired me to be a writer? I got a couple answers for that. So do you know who Stan Lee is? Have you guys heard of Stan Lee? Okay, Stan Lee is the guy who invented Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk, X-Men, Avengers, right? He made all of Captain America. He made all of those. He just came up with them, right? And I love that. Like I said, I loved comic books when I was a kid. And so he's awesome. And also, quite frankly, have any of you guys read Harry Potter yet? Started reading that? Okay. Harry Potter 1 is the coolest book on the planet. I love that book. I mean, the rest of the series is great, but number 1 is just amazing, and it blew my mind when I read it. And so those are the things I really like to read, you know? Yeah. Oh, so he said, do I want to do another Romeo and Juliet book? And is it going to be Stratford Zoo? Yeah, well, so this is actually the second book because this is a series. So the first one was Macbeth that I showed you. And the next one, I'm not sure what it's going to be yet because Shakespeare wrote 38, 39 plays, something like that. We're not quite sure because it was so long ago. Some of them got lost. Some burned up in a fire. So that's a lot to choose from, so I got to pick, right? So that's going to take me a little while. Yeah. Oh, how many books have I written? I think, because last time I counted, it was like 6 or 7. But I've got more coming out every year, right? So I'll do 3 more questions, lightning round. Here we go. Yes? Do I write anything else besides comic books? Well, I started out as a newspaper writer, and then I wrote children's picture books for a long time, and I also worked in movies for a long time, too, right? So I kind of write lots of different stuff. Yeah? If I made another book, what would I call it? I'm going to have to tell you when I come up with another book, right? Yeah. Uh-huh. Well, he asked about Diary of a Wimpy Kid and how it's a series, right? Where Diary of a Wimpy Kid has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You know, there's a lot of them, right? And I love that series, by the way. Well, yeah, I've got 2 of these so far, and hopefully I can do 38, 39 of them, right? I would love to. Shakespeare, yeah? Is he still alive? No, he died 500 years ago. His bones are in the ground. In fact, on his tombstone is a warning to anyone never to dig him up again, which some people have been wanting to do because they want to test his bones for all kinds of things, to see if he did drugs, to see if he died from being poisoned, just to find out all kinds of stuff. But when someone writes on their tombstone, don't dig up these bones or there'll be a curse on you forever, you're probably not going to do it, right? All right, last question. How did he die? That's a mystery. You know, people died from a lot of things back then. You could die just from like a hangnail, you know? It gets infected, you're gone. Yeah. So on that really happy note, thank God for antibiotics, kids. Oh, okay, apparently you've had your hand up for a long time. Can I name other books that I've written? Well, so the first one in the series is Macbeth. And the first book that I ever wrote, so it's kind of the one I'm the most proud of, was a picture book called An Undone Fairy Tale. And that was really, I like that one a lot. I still go and read that to my kid at his elementary school. Okay, and apparently I'm not going to be allowed out of here unless I answer this last question. Yes? How much money for the book? At the fair, I don't know. Are they getting them for free? You get a free copy. You get a free copy. I'm Oprah today. Thank you. Thank you very much.